All right, I would like to call to order the workshop of the Lee County Board of County Commissioners. It's June 4th, 2024. The time is 1:35. Please join me in welcoming representatives, representing Brian Donald's representatives here today. Thank you for coming. We appreciate y'all. Senator Marco Rubio's staff here. Thank you. Senator Rick Scott as well as represented here today. Senator Albritton here, staff's here. Thank you. And also in person here today is Jenna Persons-Mullica, who is joining us here today. Jenna, I'd like to give you an opportunity to say a few words if you'd like to. Yes, bottom.
Let's see. Well, good afternoon. Jenna Persons-Mullica. I'm proud to represent House District 78, which is the entire city of Fort Myers and greater Fort Myers area up in the Florida legislature. We have a phenomenal delegation. I'm representing them today, but I know they'll be bringing back all this information back to their teams. It is summertime, so a lot of folks are traveling, but we look forward to continuing to work together with the county and looking towards not only what opportunities there are, but what needs there continue to be as we continue on this long-term recovery. So thank you for initiating this meeting today, and we look forward to many more of these.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, at this time, today's topic is Hurricane Ian recovery funding. I would like to recognize County Manager Dave Harner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will now turn it over to Glenn Sire to present the presentation. Thank you, Glenn.
Okay, thank you, Dave. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Just as a preliminary matter, I do want to thank a few people, the Strategic Resources team for all of the work that they've been doing, our contractors, primarily HGA and Horn, who are in attendance, the many sub-consultants working with them, certainly our county departments for all the work they're doing that's recovery related, and for helping us put this presentation together. And as always, Samantha Weston for making the presentation look presentable, so that is appreciated. And of course, reiterate the Chairman's thanks to Representative Persons-Mullica and all of the legislative staff that are here. The Board of County Commissioners had requested an in-depth CDBG-DR program update, and at the same time, of course, you all want to collaborate with our federal and state legislative delegations to further our recovery efforts. So what we've tried to do is place this DR update within the context of Hurricane Ian recovery funding writ large, as well as a discussion about Lee County's continuing unmet needs. And so what that means is we have quite a few slides to go through. I'll try to do that expeditiously, but as always, please just interrupt anytime, ask questions, make remarks, whatever you like. So as a recovery funding, for the overview, we want to talk about the county and the cities. This does not include all jurisdictions, so independent districts in particular are not here. But for the county and the cities, we anticipate roughly $2.5 billion of recovery funding under current mechanisms. And as you can see by the pie chart, the bulk of that comes through DR, Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, FEMA Public Assistance, and state appropriations. And so most of this money is through grants of various kinds, but we do want to also recognize that almost 10% of this money is through state appropriated loans that as of today do need to be repaid at some point in the future. And when we drill down on where Lee County stands in particular, this is where we can give you the most granularity. We'll start with FEMA Public Assistance, and you can see the different types of funding by category. Roughly 2/3 of this funding was for disaster cleanup, as well as emergency protective measures that were taken in the immediate response to the storm. So that means about 1/3 of our expected public assistance reimbursements will be for permanent repairs to our many damaged facilities. And as we drill down further for Lee County, we do want to highlight the appropriations that we have received to date, roughly $76.4 million for various projects that you see listed on the left. Those loans that I talked about are listed on the right, And one other category that isn't included here, but I will just mention, is the state appropriated match for public assistance reimbursements. So Hurricane Ian is a 90-10 storm, meaning FEMA will pick up 90% of the reimbursement tab. There's a non-federal match for the remaining 10%, and the state has obliged us in covering that for us. Continuing with Lee County's funding thus far, this is various sources that don't really fit in the other categories. These were special grants, primarily for additional debris, waterway debris cleanup in particular, some damaged traffic signals, and lots of beach renourishment. Even the ones that say FDEP as the funding source here are pass-throughs from the federal government administered by the state, but that accounts for another $23 million. And having completed the drill down to Lee County government, this now, we zoom out, if you will, to the larger context of Lee County, the geography. So hazard mitigation grant program funding is not just for Lee County government projects. This is for projects that are located within the county, within the county's geography, and so it really includes all of our jurisdictions. And these are programs that are geared towards resiliency efforts, mitigating damage from future storms, that kind of thing. And we do have $435.5 million designated for those projects. There is a 25% non-federal match required, and the County Commission, as part of the CDBG-DR planning effort, dedicated $133 million of that funding to provide the local match for all of our jurisdictions on these HMGP projects where they are DR eligible. Not all of them will be eligible for the DR match, but absolutely most of them will be. So we've got the other jurisdictions as well as ourselves covered in that regard. As of right now, all of those applications are pending with the Florida Department of Emergency Management. I shouldn't say all. In a couple of instances, FDEM has forwarded the applications to FEMA for their review and approval. And actually, in one case, that being El Canal, Lee County has already received an HMGP award. So that process is underway. Right now, we anticipate that FDEM will submit the bulk of these applications to FEMA by late summer. One perhaps other thing to mention about these HMGP projects is that, like I said, they're really resiliency oriented, and for the most part, these are projects that are not in governmental capital improvement programs, meaning these are things that we probably otherwise would not be able to do but for this special funding. And in some respects, that is also true of community development block grant disaster recovery funding. In particular, I want to mention at the outset that this funding, although there's a lot of it, it cannot supplant appropriated funds that are already in place, meaning for jurisdictions that have capital improvement projects underway or have them planned and already appropriated, you can't use this funding for it. So that's an important constraint to keep in mind. But that said, we, as Lee County, have received the largest ever direct allocation of this funding from HUD to a county, and it's the second largest direct allocation in the history of the program to a local government. New York City is the only one that was larger in the wake of Hurricane Sandy. This was formally announced by Federal Register notice on May 18th of last year, and we got to a grant agreement with HUD on November 20th of last year. In between that time, we were, of course, putting our action plan together, but HUD was also doing work on its side. It was conducting a risk assessment of Lee County, ensuring that we had all the proper internal controls and safety mechanisms in place to properly distribute these funds. And so they were very satisfied in that regard, and so they gave us the grant agreement in November. The board published its first notice of funding availability in December. We put us well underway. And at a very high level, this is how the funding has been allocated. HUD's original distribution formula had a great deal more than this going to housing and a lot less towards infrastructure. And as the county conducted a needs assessment with all of our partner jurisdictions, we really determined that while housing is indeed a large need, infrastructure is just as pressing. And if we don't have the infrastructure to accompany the housing, we'll be behind, and that's not going to work. So this is the allocation that we landed on. As you look at that, a few other things to mention, and that is the overriding requirement that 70% of this $1.1 billion must be spent on projects that benefit low to moderate income populations. And for HUD's purposes, that is defined as households that make no more than 80% of the area median income. And for those of you that have some of the flyers, you can see what that means on the back of the housing flyer, where there's a table showing the different income levels. But that really is the overriding requirement of these funds. For the projects funded by DR, we do have to have a tie back to Hurricane Ian, and that is true in all cases save for about 13% of the total grant. 13% of the grant can be used for mitigation projects that will really enhance the community's resiliency, mitigate future storm events, but doesn't necessarily have to be something that was impacted by Hurricane Ian directly. So again, most of it does require a tieback, but there are a few that don't. And then the 5% administration cap, I do want to talk about that for just a moment. There's a lot of misunderstandings around this. That funding, of course, will be used to administer the program for its duration, and it's a minimum 6-year program. Very likely it will last longer than that, given some of the projects that will be undertaken. But it is a long and arduous program, lots of regulatory requirements and scrutiny that have to be met. But in addition to funding the administration of the program, this is really our contingency fund as well. So if we undertake DR projects that for some reason ultimately don't come to fruition, those are not, essentially they're not eligible for the DR funding, and so they have to be repaid to HUD. Well, we do have a little bit of a contingency fund here in that we can often use administration dollars for that payback if it's necessary. So I talked about action plan development. That is the guiding framework for how the DR monies are spent. And just for the legislative staff members in attendance, sorry, Commissioner.
Jump in for just a second, because I had a question on the previous slide. So that's a lot of money for infrastructure. Back one more. There you go. So, almost $371 million for infrastructure. I imagine there's probably a lot of those infrastructure projects will look like similar to the projects that we'll ask the state delegation for appropriations and things like that. How are we making sure that we're not overlapping? You know what I mean? That okay, so if something's eligible for and going to get awarded the infrastructure dollars, that we're not still going to the state legislature and asking our delegation to also get us funding for that.
Yeah, great question, Commissioner. It largely comes down to timing. The way we have this scheduled, and you'll see that in a future slide, is we should have most of these funding determinations for the infrastructure bucket by early fall. Okay. So well in advance of when we would need to submit local funding project requests to the legislature.
So for the folks in the legislature, if they see us bring projects forward that'll be like local projects that seem like infrastructure projects, chances are we're bringing them forward because they didn't get awarded out of this pot of money. It's money that we were not able to cover. Yeah.
And let me add that when we receive appropriation requests too, we ask the question, but we also look into whether there's a pending grant bucket that request could go into, whether there's a pending application. That hasn't been an issue in working with the county, but in working with different nonprofits and other entities, we've looked for, what's the best path and best fit, and have looked at those other options and made sure there wasn't something pending, because you can't get it in the budget twice. So if it's
right.
pending as a grant, then it wouldn't be funded in the budget. That's a great question.
Good deal. Thanks. Thank you.
Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner. So I wanted to, just for context for the legislative staff in attendance that might not have followed this previously, there was a lot of public engagement that went into putting the action plan together. So you can see we conducted many public meetings throughout the county. We took data from the Long-Term Recovery Task Force. The board has engaged in multiple conversations and actions on this. And ultimately, we came up with a detailed program plan that for the legislative staff, you do have this list of allocations on a handout in front of you. And that really gives you a little bit more detailed breakdown of where the funding is going. And so I mentioned that the first notice of funding availability was published in December of last year, and we have subsequently published one NOFA per month through April of this year. Now, those application windows have mostly closed, but for the infrastructure and public facilities silo, the board this morning voted to reopen that application window, so we can take some more of these applications, details to follow. And then the Affordable Housing Development Program is still open, and those applications are due later this month. Make sure I... So the first NOFA was for planning, and this is just a list of all of the awards that were made under that notice of funding availability. The commission awarded these some time ago, and we are currently in the process of onboarding all of these subrecipients so that they can draw this funding down. Really, this is just to show that all of our municipalities are participating in this effort, as is the school district. So moving on to the infrastructure bucket, the notice of funding availability process, just for a little bit of background. Apologize for the slide there that has recommendation out of line, but this is the process that we undertake. We receive applications from eligible applicants. They do go through a very technical review, which I'll talk about in just a moment. Ultimately, they are reviewed by an evaluation committee that has been appointed by the county commissioner and includes representatives from every municipality, who then make a recommendation for funding awards to the Board of County Commissioners, who ultimately makes those awards. And we do have $100 million currently available for public facilities and $129 million and change for critical infrastructure, which you can think of that as roads, bridges, lift stations, that sort of thing. And so I mentioned the technical review. You can see on this slide just a number of factors that go into that analysis. We have subject matter experts pouring through these applications, and they score each one based on the factors you see here in front of you. Now down below, I have added the HMGP match that we talked about earlier, as well as potential funding to harden Hertz Arena. And that's because although those two buckets don't undergo the evaluation committee review, they still have to undergo the technical review to make sure that they're worthy projects for DR funding. And here's the evaluation committee. We just want to emphasize that, they are putting a second pair of eyes on the technical review that has gone before. But they also have to work within some of these constraints that we talked about before, which is that low, moderate income benefit, as well as the very few projects that would be allowed to not have a tie back to Hurricane Ian. Of course, they'll have to think about geographic distribution and how we distribute these funds equitably. And then, of course, what are the community's priorities? Some of the projects may score really well, but the community may have a different sense of what the priorities are. And ultimately, they're just making recommendations that the board can assess. And to give you a sense of where we are today, like I said, this application window will reopen, but as of today, we have 64 project applications with requests for almost $900 million. So we're dramatically oversubscribed. That means, of course, some applicants will inevitably be disappointed, but nonetheless, we have $229 million, which will get a lot of great projects out of the ground. Moving on to the housing funding, here we have the board has already awarded housing, multifamily housing rehabilitation awards. These are existing multifamily units that were damaged by Hurricane Ian. 6 different projects were awarded recently that will rehab 836 units that have to be maintained as affordable units for a minimum of 20 years. Those are all great projects. And then the application window that's currently open is for the construction of single-family affordable housing and multifamily housing, new builds. And again, you can see the different affordability periods there. On the multifamily housing in particular, we require a minimum 30-year affordability period, but we've structured this so that developers can propose much more than that. And the longer they keep units affordable, the more points their application would receive. And then in terms of underwriting, again, with the handout, if you look at the back of that housing, we talk, or the front of it rather, I'm sorry, we talk a lot about all of the different things that go into underwriting these projects. It's sort of like doing a lender's credit review. It's almost that comprehensive. And so we just want to make sure that these projects are feasible and the developers have the carrying capacity and the experience to pull them off. Any questions about any of that before I jump into Lee Cares?
Commissioner Rain.
Mr. Clinton, I realize we're oversubscribed and you're going to rank projects, the committee will rank projects. What do you do with the applications that aren't ranked? Because I know we submitted an unmet need that was substantially higher than what we received. So they just, obviously we keep the file open and they just don't rank because of they're not ranking because the 1.1 didn't go far enough. And obviously there's an opportunity to receive more dollars in the future if we're able to. We would then reactivate those. How would that work?
Yes, sir. That up to the board's discretion, but it could exactly work as you've described. The only projects files that would really be closed are those that are ineligible for DR funding. The rest we can absolutely keep live in the hopes of getting additional money.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. So jumping into Lee Cares, this is the individual housing assistance program. This is for households damaged by Hurricane Ian. And, you know, every community is a little different. They all have different priorities. And for this disaster recovery funding, Lee County had so many displaced households that, of course, our county commission wanted to make that the top priority. And so I do want to give a real shout out to the Horn team that's represented over here today. They've been fantastic partners in making this program happen. We've gone back and reviewed historical data, and other than programs that already had these kinds of housing programs in place because they were hit by a series of subsequent storms, this is the fastest launch that we've been able to find, and that's in large part thanks to everybody involved, including Horn and their team. And so the application window for this program is now closed. We received over 2,500 applications, and we'll show you where those originated. I think this is an interesting map because the darker the color, the more the applications by zip code. And while everyone understands what happened along the coastline, fewer people understand how far the storm spread some real devastation upriver. And so we had a lot of flooding very far inland, and we're getting a lot of housing applications from those zip codes. So just kind of an important thing to keep in mind as we go through this. And it's quite an elaborate process that we have to undertake, as you might imagine. I won't read all of these to you, but there's an incredible amount of steps to the process, lots of checks and balances for HUD, as there should be. I was going to show you an environmental review file, but a standard environmental review just for an individual house is usually around 80 pages, so I won't do that to you. But it is a lot of work, and I say that because, well, we'll show you who's working on it, but then we'll get into timelines. So we do have, of course, dedicated county staff. There are 13 general contractors who are doing the construction work, and then Horn has 45 individuals, and you can see the breakdown of what each of those personnel are doing for Horn and for us. What's not on here that I do want to mention is for, let's see, January through April, we had 12 full-time dedicated Horn team members who did nothing but community outreach. They knocked on doors, they held events. We talked to thousands of people, and that's how we were able to get so many applications so quickly. But in terms of the timeline, this really just gives you sort of how long it takes on average to get through one of these projects. So if an applicant really has all of their documents in order, this is what they could expect in terms of a timeline. So it's, it is a fairly laborious process. Many of these steps have regulatory periods that we can't do anything about, and I've already talked about environmental review, so I'll focus there. For instance, the Muskogee Nation has a 30-day period in which we have to consult with them, and they can review these projects to see if they think there's any kind of disturbance to historic artifacts. And we have to allow that full 30 days if they want to take it. So there's a number of steps along the way where that's in play. And so as you commissioners and as the legislative staff's bosses start getting calls from constituents to say, hey, I made this application to Lee Cares, where's my house? We will help them through that. Everybody has a case manager, and we can detail for them exactly where they are in the process, but it does require some patience. And just to drill down with you a little bit on these applications, this is for the rehabilitation, reconstruction, and elevation. So if your house was damaged and we need to put it back in order for you one way or another, our current data suggests that we will ultimately, out of those 2,500 applications, help more than 800 of them with housing reconstruction, probably costing somewhere in the neighborhood of $180 million, and you can see what it's costing per unit with the projects that we've done so far. I do want to, I want to highlight the mobile home unit replacement. So I think that seems like a fairly big number, and it is for mobile home units, but the thing to keep in mind on this is we have to comply with homeowner association requirements. And what you find in Lee County is most mobile home units are located in either gated or HOA communities where you have to have carports, you have to have other ancillary buildings or amenities. And so it's not just the cost of replacing the mobile home itself. Plus, if we need to do anything for water, sewer connection, septic, whatever, I mean, that's all built into this cost. Now, what's not on here is the homeowner purchase assistance applications. We anticipate helping ultimately more than 100 people into new homes with that assistance. So we will continue to update you as we refine the numbers through the summer. Moving on to public services, what we're funding here is the long-term recovery group that's being coordinated by the Catholic Diocese. There are lots of folks that continue to need help. They were either displaced or they lost a car, or what have you, need to get to work. They have various needs, and the diocese is coordinating efforts to help those people, and some of this DR funding is going towards that effort. And then on the behavioral health side, we all know the deficit there in pretty much every community across Florida, and this really intensified for us in the wake of Hurricane Ian, and you can see some of the challenges that we confronted there listed on the right side. And so some of this DR funding is going towards an implementation study to identify gaps and what can be done to fill those gaps, and then the board has also set aside some funding to actually implement that plan down the road. Okay, we're winding down here on DR, and just to remind everybody on the administration side, there are voluminous transparency and accountability measures in place. Again, without reading through each of these, suffice it to say there are stacks and stacks of policy documents that we adhere to. We are subject to constant HUD monitoring. We are, of course, recipients of an annual single audit from an external auditor, and they do assess our internal controls, our financial reporting, and our programmatic compliance. And then the clerk has his Office of Inspector General, and they can do programmatic audits. And then HUD always has the ability through its Office of Inspector General to perform an audit should they deem that necessary.
Hey, Glenn, could I ask a question while you're talking about that? Just curious. So does the money work the same with this as it does all the other county money, where we'll approve the expenditure, but it's still the clerk's office that's got to write the check?
Yes, sir, absolutely.
So, I mean, there's still yet another check and balance there, too. I think that's important to point out. I mean, it's the people's money. We want to make sure we're watching that it's spent correctly and appropriately. So.
Yeah, thank you for that, Commissioner, and a big thanks to the clerk and his team. They have collaborated about this, and yep, couldn't be done without them.
Mr. Salyer, and in terms of the CDBG-DR funds that are coming down in the different pots, for those applications that are approved, is the money provided upfront or is it on a reimbursement? And how is that handled? Because that might add another layer of accountability.
Another great question, Representative, and it is reimbursement based. There are a few opportunities where we can do some advanced draws, but they're fairly limited, and of course we wouldn't want to do much of that anyway, just as a risk proposition. So it is almost completely reimbursement based.
And I know you're holding basically some contingency funds in the administration fund, and while this is the largest CDBG DR grant that's gone to a county, so it's hard to compare, do we know or have we looked at other jurisdictions that have received these type of grants and what funds might have been necessary to return or were clawed back because the projects didn't go through? What percentage?
We have. So what we've looked at more than percentages, because ours is an outsized award, the ratios sort of are skewed. But what we have tried to understand is projects that have failed and why and how we can avoid that. Any other questions about this? Okay. And so we do have to maintain an official system of record for HUD. We would want to do that anyway, of course. And so what we've done is really tie 3 electronic platforms together. Horn brought a fully developed system for the individual housing program that we've just tweaked for ours. We have built out what we call VistaTracks, which is our subrecipient management program for all of the other programs. And we tie it all together with this thing called Grant Tracks that will allow us to spit out or generate some pretty sophisticated reporting once we're farther down the road and have actually drawn these funds down and expended them. And so just one kind of last thing on the program itself. Again, this is the detailed allocation that we talked about earlier. This is really just to visit next steps. And so I think with the board's action today on infrastructure, we should anticipate probably September timeframe for the board to make those awards. And that lines up really well with the individual housing program. We've tasked Horn with getting through all of the applications and making award determinations by September, so that when the board then awards the affordable housing grants in October, we will really better understand where we are in terms of the spending so that the board could reallocate funding at that time should it choose to do so. Any questions about that in particular? Okay, so then the last thing on DR, do we have, I was going to show you the website, but rather than try to mess around with it, it's already a long presentation. If you go to our CDBG-DR website, and you can see the URL there at the top, you will learn just about everything you want about this program and how Lee County is executing it. And if you really want to drill down, I encourage you to look into the document library. We will be posting hundreds, literally hundreds of documents related to this program, and there's already scores of them there. So you can really learn a lot through that document library in particular. And that segues to the unmet needs discussion, so I just want to make sure we don't have any DR questions before I move on. Yes, sir.
Well, thank you very much. I want to go back to, I think it is, we're talking about money, we're talking about facilities and stuff. coming from a real estate background, we have the developer, let me just go back there, developer qualifications and stuff. How are we vetting that to make sure that the money is used judiciously? We've had a lot of people coming in doing things right or wrong, so I'm just particularly interested in how that developer experience and capacity is being looked at.
Yes, sir. So we've done a couple of things. We've engaged all of our internal subject matter experts, but in addition to that, because we don't typically do credit underwriting, if you will, we have leveraged our HGA associates to bring in subconsultants who do this for a living. And so they are helping us on the financial underwriting in particular. And then as an ultimate sort of safeguard, we've assembled, you have assembled as the board, an affordable housing committee made up of subject matter experts who this is what they do. And the chair of that committee, for instance, who appeared before you with some recommendations a couple meetings ago, is the chair of the Florida Housing Finance Corporation. So we have multiple layers of expertise looking at each of these projects.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Get back here. Bear with me. Okay, so the final section is a discussion of continuing unmet needs. Mentioned earlier the Resiliently Recovery and Resilience Plan, and that really is an umbrella plan that covers a wide range of needs and is a terrific document that can really help us with our advocacy with federal and state legislators in particular. Because it does touch on the community's needs, the municipal needs, and of course those of the county directly. And for those of you who are interested, you can see that plan at resiliently.com. It has 43 different initiatives under these areas, and these areas overlap, and the initiatives overlap, as you would imagine. So there's a lot of detail to dig into there. And I won't talk about municipal needs because each of them have their own nuances that they should speak to. But in terms of community needs, we did want to highlight for the representative and for our legislative staff in attendance, what we hear a lot of from the community is HOAs, CDDs, and even just neighborhoods that don't have those governance structures, whose seawalls were devastated, their lake shore has eroded, of course their streets and lighting have taken damage and their stormwater systems might be compromised, and beach erosion is a big one for some of the gated communities on the coast. And there really aren't any dedicated financial resources for those types of, the county does not have funding to assist with that sort of thing. And then on the hurricane debris side, you probably know this, but just to point it out that there still is Hurricane Ian related debris out there. If it lodged on private property and the parcel owner has been unable to track down the owner, they may have a problem. In many instances, there's debris on public property that's not owned by the county, so there's very little that we would be able to do about it. And one case in particular of that is in state waters where there is still debris within mangroves, and it will impede their recovery if it's not taken care of. And that leaves us with Lee County government unmet needs, and these are just a few that we've chosen to highlight, but they really are the major ones. I'll start with Fort Myers Beach Water Reclamation Facility. And so you know that facility took a lot of damage in Ian because of storm surge, and it had to be rehabilitated. We were going to rebuild it anyway, but the fact of the matter is that because of what happened on Fort Myers Beach, the intensity of the redevelopment that is going to take place is going to require us to enhance treatment capacity to serve all of that need. And so just for the enhanced capacity that we're going to have to build, we put that at around a $60 million effort. And so that's, it's over $200 million in total for this project, but that's just the portion that we really attribute to Ian that is not already covered by FEMA public assistance. And then keeping in that same vein, the Moss Marine Pump Station. Now this is on the potable water side. This is part of the Fort Myers beach town water distribution system, but they buy all their bulk water from Lee County Utilities. And what really needs to happen in order to keep pressures up and again to serve this redevelopment is we need to relocate that pump station onto the mainland into LCU service territory. We can more easily maintain it and operate it, and that's the price tag you see for that effort. On the transportation side, we continue to have some costs that will not be federal highway reimbursed, will not be FEMA reimbursed. In particular, as one example, signal cabinets. So they were compromised by saltwater intrusion from the storm. However, we were able to put them back together and make them function. So the federal government does not want to pay to replace those, but the reality is their life is severely shortened and they're going to have to be replaced soon, and we don't have a funding source since the federal government isn't up for it. And then within the Matlacha corridor, I want to highlight Little Pine Island Bridge. The legislature has already been very generous in this project, but it is currently under design by FDOT. They have intimated that there could be some additional costs that aren't yet covered, and so stay tuned. We will certainly let you know as that develops. On the more generic facilities side, we have $8 million here as our estimated cost to rebuild San Carlos Island Maritime Park, and very pleased to say that Governor DeSantis largely took that one off the table this morning. He made this $7.5 million award to Lee County so that we can get this project underway. It's a fantastic project. It'll be used by the shrimp industry during blue skies, and it can be repurposed for emergency marine operations for disaster response. And so it's going to help strengthen our economy and make our community safer. And so thank you to Secretary Alex Kelly and his commerce team that really helped us put this in motion. Thanks to Representative Persons Mullica and her colleagues who funded this grant program, and then of course the governor for making it happen. That's exciting development. We've got $5 million for field lighting all throughout the county parks, and there's multiple reasons why all of that won't be covered by FEMA, so that's an outstanding need. The Sanibel Causeway probably should have a question mark instead of that number. We are still sorting through with FEMA and Federal Highway what the ultimate reimbursements will be, so we know there will be a need, we just can't quantify it yet. And really the same is true of Punta Rasa boat ramp as well. It may require further dredging for a full reopening. That is being assessed currently, and if it does need that, we might need to get in there before the FEMA process would really allow us to be reimbursed for it. So stay tuned on that one as well. And then just as a final matter, this is just to put things in context and give you an order of magnitude. Lost revenues from Hurricane Ian. That first one, the property taxes that we rely on to fund so many different things, that is a one-year estimate. And it's based on what the Revenue Estimating Conference had projected for property valuations and tax collections versus what we actually collected. And so that number continues to accumulate, of course, until we reach full recovery. But this is just 1 year, so I do want to point that out. And then the user fees, that is a pretty straightforward proposition. That's fairly easy to calculate the loss there. And then on the enterprise funds, the utilities is easy to compute, and the tourist development tax, again, that's based on historical collections versus actual after the storm. And so I think, Mr. Chairman, with that, would try to answer questions that you have.
And that is, I think this is a great example of the dedication and hard work of the Lee County staff to not only continue to run Lee County in the way that we have to continue to operate, but when a major disaster hits our community, to see the people step up and to get all this done. Seems like it took a long time, but really in a short period of time. So I want to really thank the staff. I don't think they get enough credit for all the hard work they do. And it's impressive. So from a business person, an outside person, it's very impressive. So I just want to make that statement. And Mr. Harner, do you have anything?
I do not. Thank you.
Do we have any other comments? Commissioner Hammond.
Just to wrap up with a note of gratitude to the delegation, to the Congressman's office, to the Senator's offices, to everyone who's here today. Thank you for coming and taking a chance to listen to it and see. It's as you can tell, it's a pretty comprehensive list that we have here, an amount of funding we've received. But I think what you saw when you looked at the long-term recovery task force results were there were still quite a few unmet needs out there. And so I think it's easy, if you're not intimately familiar with the day-to-day of what's going on, to say, wow, they just tons of money, shouldn't that be enough to cover everything? And the truth is, we hopefully today are trying to demonstrate that we're being as prudent as we can with the money we've been awarded so far. But as we continue to bring those unmet needs, those are unmet needs that we vetted through a long-term recovery task force, through a process where we involve the community to say, hey, what do we need to do to get back to full strength after this storm? And so, we're trying to come to you all with the best asks that we think could help get the community back on their feet. And we appreciate everything you guys have done to fight for us. It's amazing to, every time we've encountered any kind of a bureaucratic type roadblock, we either call our representatives or our senator's office or our congressman's office, and y'all have always been right there to answer the call. And so I just wanted to share a tremendous amount of gratitude before we end today.
Commissioner, anything else? Commissioner Wayne.
Sure. I think that is great, Commissioner Hammond. I couldn't agree with you more. I think the issue is, in one breath, you are extremely grateful for what we've received. But the magnitude of the devastation we have here, I don't think people get their arms wrapped around it when you talk about $35 billion worth of property damage. So I never want to seem unappreciative, but the task in front of us, as we continue to develop the items that we need, people look at $1 billion, but our unmet need was $9.4 billion. So there's still $8 billion that we've not been able to address based on what we submitted. Those are just some of the issues. And listen, the state has been phenomenal, federal has been there for us, but the amount of devastation we have, I just think that people truly think that it wasn't nearly what it is. All you do is go out to the communities and look at a Pine Island or Fort Myers Beach or Sanibel, and this is going to be a 7 to 10 year recovery when we're back in so many ways. There's not a condominium association that's online in Sanibel. Property values came up in one area, but in another area it's still negative, and those are still going through it. I look at Pine Island, and we're still dealing with people having addressed removing their house. We're trying to deal with those difficult issues. So, I never want to seem ungrateful, but the amount of need that we have, when you just look at revenue alone, we're off $60 million, and we're still functioning as an entity. The other thing for the record is we deficit spended because we had reserves. Had we not had reserves to balance our general fund budget, we wouldn't have been able to get through this. So those are just some of the things that I don't think people realize. We're trying to be good stewards, and I agree. We're trying to be prudent with our dollars, but we're also trying to get things done as quickly as possible. And we're working through the channels, and everyone's been phenomenal in helping us. But I just want it to be not unnoticed that our need will be continuing for years, unfortunately.
Representative Malika.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to piggyback and follow up on the Commissioner's comments. Just this morning, our Governor was here to encourage us all to get ready for hurricane season and take advantage of the tax breaks that we have in place through June 14th, and then again for another couple weeks towards the end of August. But when asked about hurricane recovery, he made a great point in saying that the work that's been done today in Lee County in Southwest Florida, Collier, and elsewhere, we're years ahead where, for comparison purposes, Homestead was after Andrew. We're already years ahead. I think he even said maybe around year 5 in recovery. But it's a long-term recovery, and we still have so much work to do. So I think it speaks volumes on the work of the state in conjunction with the local governments that we've come so far so fast. But we need to be a team and continue to work as a team, and all of us working towards the same goal and same purpose for many years to come. and seeing that there were almost 900 million in applications for just infrastructure projects and critical infrastructure related to hurricane recovery. I mean, that's huge, and I'm sure when the housing projects come in, that those are going to come in too, quite above the allotment. But 9 billion in unmet needs, and you guys have done the work to show that. And I just look forward to continuing to work along with my colleagues and you all as a team moving forward and not taking our eye off the goal, because this is going to be a long-term recovery. And we all understand that at every single level.
Thank you.
Anything else? Mr. Arner, any other business in front of us?
No, sir.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank all the representatives here for coming and seeing where we're at. We really appreciate that. It gives a picture of what we still have in front of us, and we know it's a lot. So at this point, meeting is adjourned. Thank you.